Killer is Dead was released in 2013 for the 360 and PS3. It was developed by Grasshopper Manufacture and directed by Suda51, the punk madman behind classics like Killer 7 and No More Heroes. It was also published by Kadokawa Games, and if you're an old viewer from like 2015 when I solely made anime content, then you'll remember that they were the bane of my existence. As in, they broke my fucking back over copyright claims. But this game didn't. I don't know if I'm gonna win that for a slick transition, but it's better off to just keep it moving. Honestly, Killer is Dead is one of the most visually stunning, inventive, and intriguing games that I've ever played for this channel. And I don't know if you're new here, but I've looked at a ton of games at this point, so this isn't something that I'm just saying off the cuff. Well, this is, and now this is, and that was, and so is that. Despite only playing the opening hours of the aforementioned Suda games as well as Let It Die, I gotta say that this is the most gripping one, at least in terms of their openings. Killer kept me in a trance from the opening prologue all the way to the ending, so much so that I beat the game in only about 3 sittings. It's not perfect, it's got a decent amount of issues, and we'll get to that soon enough, but I should probably talk about what I like first. Killer is a hack and slash game. It's nowhere near the level of any later DMC games, but it's serviceable. There's only one sword, the Gecko, or when translated to English, it's known as Moonlight, which is a pretty interesting name that weaves into the game's overall narrative. In combat, it's extremely basic and there's very few upgrades for it. And while there are specific combos you can do like upward slashes, instead of learning those, you're probably better off just pressing the X button. There's a pretty cool execution QTE, almost like Bayonetta. The only thing is, it happens automatically once your combo gets high enough, which is cool for like the first couple of missions, but it eventually just begins to break up the flow of combat and gets tedious. Especially since the animations never change from beginning to end. Shit, I forgot this is the positive part of the video. I do really like that it gives you the option to decide whether you want currency to upgrade your abilities, health, or your blood, with the latter functioning as a stamina bar. Despite what you may think from how I'm describing it and from the gameplay on screen, Killer is not a button masher. Much like most games, I played my first playthrough on easy, and even then, enemies constantly blocked attacks and they'll quickly rush you if you're not careful. Like, really quick. The only way to succeed is to actually block and dodge attacks, aka Code Vein in a nutshell. Which goes to show that even on the easiest difficulty, Killer expects the player to be fast and responsive, but not dumb. I like the balance of the use case for Mondo's sword and his gun arm, also known as the muscleback. I kind of feel like guns have very few use cases in most other hack and slash titles, and they're really just there to give the game a little bit of panache, a little pizzazz. But in Killer, there's just as many enemies wielding firearms as there are who wield swords and shields. And it helps that they all require different attack strategies. On paper, and maybe even as I describe it to you, it sounds really standard. But in practice, it makes the game feel like it's a bit of a balancing act, which I appreciate. Towards the end of the game, you'll be fighting monsters who shoot laser beams, robots who block all of your attacks, these monkey things that hit like a 10-ton truck and are also covered in impenetrable armor, ninjas who are just as skilled as you are with a sword, and snipers who won't hesitate to shoot your fucking head clean off. So despite the fact that there aren't any new kinds of enemies introduced after mission 7 or so, what's already there keeps the game feeling fun for the remaining duration of the narrative. The boss fights are probably some of my favorites in video games, at least visually. A lot of them feel very Persona-esque in their theatricality, but I'm gonna stop that train of thought right there because I mentioned that franchise way too much in these videos already. The Giant was my favorite in terms of fun factor. It almost felt like a satire of old kaiju movies. It also reminded me of the Savior in DMC4, so much to the point that I think that there is a legitimate legal case for plagiarism, no bullshit. Hamada Yama was probably the most interesting and difficult boss since he was a skilled sword wielder as well. And because of that, he constantly blocked my gun, as well as my attempts to preemptively finish the fight by just mindlessly attacking him, forcing me to actually learn his attack patterns and play far more defensively than I was used to. And it's for this reason that Hamada is probably the best boss in the game. My favorite fight in terms of mechanics was definitely Dolly. The part that I'm specifically referencing is one of the most inventive things I've ever seen in a video game. It's when Dolly turns invisible, and Mondo has to find where she is amidst all of her doppelgangers. If he's successful, then the camera shifts from the standard third person to Dolly's point of view, making it easy to locate where she is and smash her face in. It's a mechanic that's recycled from one of Suda's other games, Blood Plus. Nevertheless, I'm glad he decided to use it again here in Killer is Dead. It's a really memorable moment that adds a flare of creativity to this already good fight. But sadly, that creativity that breathes through the rest of the game doesn't really extend to the other boss fights, which are basically just sponges who occasionally block your attacks. It wasn't a huge problem with the first boss fight with Alice, but that same problem persists for a chunky 70-ish% of the fights, including the final boss of the entire game. Needless to say, that one left a bit of a sour aftertaste. Part of me wants to replay this game on hard so I can appreciate all of the attack patterns and come to actually understand the bosses. But the rest of me doesn't really think it'll get any better. Those fights will just be more difficult and as a result, last longer. Anyways, once that story shit's over with, you still have tons of stuff to do in the game. You got sub-missions, Scarlet challenges, and yes, even the infamous Gigolo missions, and I'll get to those later. But first, let it be put on record that I completed everything in the game, except for 17 of the Scarlet challenges. Holy shit, those are kind of hard. So take that, Gerard. What are you at, 400 games? You think you're cool? You think you're better than me? I hate this bit. I mention this because I rarely do side missions that aren't automatically appealing to me. I was almost on autopilot after the final mission because I still wanted to see everything that Killer had to offer. So that is a compliment towards how addictive this game is. It's just a damn shame that the actual sub-missions are very bare bones. All they do is take a small part of a main mission level and recycle it with some random task. From defusing bombs, to attacking wires on your motorcycle, aka hands down the worst mission of the whole game, to collecting items and turret sections. Just a gaggle of turret sections. If you couldn't tell from my emphasis, you're mostly going to be doing those last two. While I'm kind of complaining, these missions aren't really that bad. They typically run for about 5 to 10 minutes. They're obviously just there to fluff out the game so you can get your money's worth. And they do a pretty okay job of doing that. I'm just glad I played this on PC since I can use gyro aim, which makes all of these shooting sections a million times easier. Kinda sucks that the rest of the PC port is doo-doo feces. With the graphics options being a simple low, medium, high, the frame rate being capped at an odd numbered 31 frames per second. Plus, there is no native windowed mode or mouse unlock whatsoever, making the recording process for this game a bit of a fucking nightmare. Get it? But this port is still light years ahead of the releases on 7th gen consoles, which ran this game like they were on their last breath. That's enough stalling. It's now time to get into the Gigolo missions. I don't really mind them. They're goofy and thankfully completely optional to the overall game. It's unfortunate that these missions have superseded the game itself to the point that, instead of literally everything I just previously mentioned in this video, these dates are Killer is Dead's legacy, at least in the eyes of the general public. If you actually play the missions, then you'll see that it's a pretty alright minigame. It reminds me of those don't get caught flash games. You guys remember those? I can't put one on screen because I'm scared of what will come up if I put that in my search bar. This may be a bit unfair to project on it, but I would have liked these missions more if they were more like a dating sim, with emphasis on making the right dialogue choice in order for the date to go well. Spoiler alert, the Persona fan likes dating sims. Who fucking knew? But then again, the devs over at Grasshopper knew exactly who was going to be playing these missions and gave them what they wanted. If you succeed in not getting caught, and if you get the highest affinity with your date before running out of presents to give her, then you get a cutscene heavily implying a one-night stand. But the catch is that the more you complete the same date over and over again, the more scenes you get to see of what happens afterwards, inciting players who like a specific girl, like me, Vampire GF for life, to play the same mission. Personally, these dates don't bother me whatsoever, but I can completely understand if you don't like them or even think that they're a bit out of place and very creepy. Especially since they have very little to no place in the story whatsoever, and it seems like the director himself agrees. Yeah, in 2015, a book was released regarding the development process of previous Grasshopper games, and Suda straight up said that he didn't want to make the Gigolo missions, that because of the online coverage for this game as well as Lollipop Chainsaw, which released just a year prior, Suda was afraid of Grasshopper being labeled as an erotic company. And these missions were pressured on him to appeal to a Japanese audience by one of the publishers, Kadokawa. Well, it's good to know they still suck donkey dick. Killer is Dead is a game that seems like it wouldn't have a narrative, and if it did, then it would mostly be a joke, especially since before this video I had never completed another Suda game, and in the first couple hours it seemed like this was the case. The opening was still amazing for setting the tone and the style, and there was some really good dialogue along the way, but I still had the feeling that it'd be just another regular schmegular action game. But as it goes on, it's made very clear that Suda has a narrative that he wants to tell. One that initially seems like it's a simple way to tell jokes and kick ass, but it eventually reveals itself as a very interesting story with some creative ideas and really good payoff. From what I've played and what I've heard, it's not as deep as Killer 7 or No More Heroes thematically, but I personally don't know or really think that it was trying to be. To put it in the simplest way that I can, it's like if James Bond had a conscience. It's kind of a tragedy about manipulation, corruption, and memories. One where our heroes are just as immoral as the villains and begin to slowly lose their humanity through their actions, despite how good they may actually be at heart. I'm not trying to make it sound like Killer is Dead is Game of the Year 2013, but what I am saying is that if you went into this game expecting anything besides what Suda delivered, then I suggest revisiting this game with an open mind. There's just so much added to the story in the last few chapters that it's honestly worth a second playthrough, if you like the combat, that is. However, there's a diaper full of shit that's just not really explained. Why the fuck is there a unicorn? What is this, Blade Runner? Initially, it feels like the story's conclusion is very opaque, but the more you reflect on it, rewatch some cutscenes in theater mode, and even replay some missions, you quickly realize that it's very straightforward. But on the flip side of this pancake, there's tons of questions and subplots that are just left untouched by the end, besides the unicorn. Part of me feels like Killer should have been at least 3 chapters longer, but what do I know? My playthrough lasted about 6 or so hours, and while I appreciate that it didn't waste any time whatsoever and kept a consistently fast pace, I would have liked if it explained some things, or at the very least got a lore book like Killer 7 did. And last, but certainly not least, is my opinion on the possibility of a sequel. Usually I'm very in the middle about certain works getting sequels. I really only want them to happen if the original creator is behind it, and if the story feels like it could realistically keep on going. Of course, there are other reasons as to why a sequel would be made besides the artistic side, aka money. Sadly, Killer is Dead wasn't so fortunate in that camp. Despite Suda's heavy implication of a sequel before its release, Killer is Dead did poorly financially and critically. Of course, I understand the business side of the industry and why these things happen. In this case, I completely understand why a sequel wasn't made. But I need this to fucking happen. I don't care if I have to fund the damn thing myself. Killer is Dead, on top of having a satisfying conclusion, sets up more than enough ground for a sequel to stand on, especially when rewatching the final minutes as well as the opening hour. Let's just say, between you and me, that sequel could have been legendary. With the game deciding to either condemn or save a certain character, it would have been a very interesting turn of events. Had it expanded on the lore and given us a satisfying continuation, I can definitely envision a world where Killer is Dead was the next big hack and slash franchise. But as is, we're left with a visually interesting, really fun, and a little repetitive hack and slash game. I get why critics and audiences alike weren't wowed by it, and why a lot of people have even forgot about its existence, but I really love it. I dated a vampire lady, I killed a fucking kaiju, I rode a motorcycle against a samurai riding a fucking tiger, and I ate those gosh diddly darn soft-boiled eggs. Because Mika is best girl, I lied earlier. For only $20 on GOG and Steam, I think it's a damn shame if you don't have this in your collection if you're a Suda fan, or if you're a fan of hack and slash titles. It's got a surprisingly good story and some fun gameplay. Plus, it helps that it's visually one of the most interesting and beautiful games that I've seen in a while. Also, soundtrack, really good, just S-rank shit. I don't know why I forgot to mention that, I usually keep that as an important thing to add, but hey, you've been listening to it this whole time, so if you liked it, You should go listen to it on YouTube since it's not on Spotify, because of course it isn't. If you like Suda51 games, then you should already have Killer is Dead and Killer 7 on your PC. Plus, they're both DRM free, so that's pretty great. Anyways, I'm exhausted, so it's time to close the book on this video. So that's all I got for you guys. Like, subscribe, and all that jazz. I'll catch you guys next time. Later, kids. Have a good night.
What are you doing?
Can't you tell just by looking? I'm acquiring unparalleled power.
Conquering the world is so overrated. Plus, it's way out of style. And besides,